Shri Gurubhyo Namaha. Welcome to online classes, Standard 12, Biology. The first unit, Reproduction. In this unit, we have 4 chapters. The first chapter, Reproduction in Organisms. Second, Sexual Reproduction in Flowering Plants. Third, Human Reproduction. 4, Reproductive Health. We will start with the first chapter, Reproduction in Organisms. We know that every organism has a time period, that is from birth to death of an organism. This time gap between birth and death is what we call it as a lifespan. And this lifespan has different phases. That is, the first one, the birth phase, that is every organism gives rise to an individual. Then the second phase is the growth phase, which is otherwise called as a juvenile phase. The third phase is the reproductive phase. The fourth phase is what we call it as aging, and in plants we call it as senescence. Then the last phase is the death phase. So, we will see that every organism has all these phases from birth to the death of an individual. And when we see the lifespan of an organism, it varies from one organism to another, and it is not correlated with the size of the organism. The shortest lifespan we will find in an insect called as a mayfly, which has only 24 hours, that is a day. The young one hatches, from the pupa the adult emerges, and it all takes place only in a day. And the longest lifespan we will see in tortoise, 300 to 400 years. Parrot has a lifespan of 140 years. And human beings 100 years, and some plants it goes for 1000 years. Now, then when we say that, what is reproduction? A reproduction is a biological process in which an organism produces its offspring similar to itself, and this helps in continuity of the organisms, that is, the species are formed generation after another. And depending upon how many organisms are involved in reproduction, the reproduction is of 2 types. One, asexual, and the second mode of reproduction is called as sexual. In this asexual reproduction, only one parent is involved one parent is involved, there is no fusion of gametes, and the division which takes place is mitotic, and the organisms which are formed are morphologically, genetically similar to the parent, and we call them as clones. Whereas in this reproduction, that is the sexual reproduction, two parents are involved, that is male and female, and the gametes are formed by a division, what we call it as meiotic division. After this, the fusion takes place, resulting in the formation of a zygote, and this zygote undergoes mitotic division, resulting in an offspring. Here, it is because of two parents involved, we will find variations, and that is what we call it as recombination. So, we say that asexual and sexual are the two modes of reproduction. Now, we will look into the asexual modes of reproduction. As we said, asexual reproduction involves only one parent. The first example we are going to see is fission. This fission, what is fission? It is nothing but splitting up of an organism. We can see in amoeba and paramecium. This asexual mode of reproduction, the first example which we are going to see is fission. The example is amoeba or paramecium. Here, a single amoeba divides into two, and this fission is called as binary fission because two individuals are formed. And from this, again this daughter cell will divide and give rise to two. Here, when we see the single cell organism, one cell giving rise to two, this two gives rise to another two. Here, there is no death of an organism, so we call this as immortal. And the second kind of fission what we see in Plasmodium, a malarial parasite, a nuclei divides into many tiny bits and the cytoplasm encircles this nuclei, resulting in many individuals, and during the favorable conditions they burst out and these individuals are released. Such kind of fission is what we call it as multiple fission. The second kind of asexual reproduction is budding. That is, from the parent body, a small outgrowth arises and it detaches from the parent and it leads a life. In this budding, there are two types. One is called as an exogenous budding, the other one endogenous. The word itself tells exogenous is outside. Example is, in each cell, a fungi, a small outgrowth arises here, and this is the bud, and after it matures, it detaches from the parent and it leads a life. It becomes an individual. And the other example what we can see is the hydra. On the parent body, we will find a small outgrowth arises here, and this, after maturity, it detaches from the parent. But whereas in this endogenous budding, we find that the buds are being produced inside the body, and the example we can see in a freshwater sponge, spongilla. A freshwater sponge, we will find that it is a porous body with an opening, and this is the body cavity. We will find that there are so many buds which are formed, and these buds are what we call it as gemmules. Now, when we look the structure of a gemmule, it is a compact mass of cells encircled by a gelatinous material. We will find the calcareous bodies here, which we call them as spicules, and this prevents from drying, and these gemmules are called as archaeocytes. And they are released from this opening, and then when they find a suitable substratum, it develops into a plant body. Now, we will go to the third mode of asexual reproduction, where spores are formed. Here we are going to see two different kinds of spores. The first type of spore which is formed, what we call them as a zoospore. And these spores are being seen in Chlamydomonas, an algae, and these spores are motile. They are biflagellated structures and they are motile. They swim in the water and they grow. And the other example of spore formation is conidia, and these spores we will find in a fungi called penicillium, and they are non-motile spores. And we will see these spores in the form of a chain, and they are non-motile. And the fourth mode of asexual reproduction is fragmentation. This we can find in Spirogyra, that is a filamentous algae, and this filamentous algae breaks into small fragments, and each fragment will develop into a filament. And the next example in fragmentation we can find in a flatworm. planaria, any fragment of the planaria will develop into an individual. Now, when we talk about asexual reproduction in plants, two types we are going to go through. The first one is what we call it as apomixis. Here, an embryo is formed from an unfertilized ovule. And the second kind of asexual reproduction which we will find in plants is what we call it as vegetative propagation. What is vegetative propagation? It is the propagation which involves the vegetative parts of the plant, that is the stem, the root and the leaf, and these vegetative parts are called as propagules. You call them as vegetative propagules. We will look into the artificial mode of reproduction in the next class.